Hello, and welcome to Transformation Teaching's Koan of Illness interview series. A koan is an essentially unsolvable puzzle that leads spiritual aspirants to a deeper reality. Chronic illness is a koan, and it too has the potential to lead us to deeper understandings. In this series, we are bringing you the voices of people who can lead us into deeper perspectives and shed their light on this koan of illness. Any questions you might have about the interview or the topic, you can write to me, Lynne Puentes, at lynn@transformationteaching.com. Today, we're going to be talking with Lynne Feldman. Lynne D. Feldman is both an educator and a lawyer who grew up in Dallas amidst the civil rights struggles and the Kennedy assassination. But her brilliant mother was afflicted with severe mental illnesses, and that joined her fascination with politics and the effect of the psyche on human development. When Lynne was told she had both invasive breast cancer and serious lung cancer, this non-smoker faced several critical dilemmas. What do I do next, and how do I deal with this double assault on my life? Her doctors encouraged her to attack the disease with surgery and traditional chemotherapy. Others suggested alternative methods that help the body to heal itself with nutrition and herbal remedies. Still others pointed to complementary practices like prayer, meditation, and depth psychology as the best way to cure herself of the disease. With so many conflicting viewpoints in the modern medical marketplace, Lynne saw that no single perspective had all the answers. Faced with some immediate decisions, she realized she would have to take her healing into her own hands, and so she did. Embarking on a 3-year healing journey, Lynne exhaustively researched the best of traditional, complementary, and alternative medicine, and then synthesized an approach to healing herself that ultimately led to her recovery. Integral Healing, the book, tells Lynne's story. One part memoir and one part how-to guide. It outlines the valuable integral approach introduced by philosopher Ken Wilber to healing that she developed along the way, providing you with a practical blueprint for developing an individualized healing program of your own. Her book is available online at Amazon. She's a volunteer with the Cancer Hope Network that links her with others so she might share her story and her approach to what healing really means. So, wow, Lynne, I read your bio and it just exhausts me. How are you functioning? Really, I noticed at the bottom of your email you have a little quote. It says, "Nevertheless, she persisted." Well, golly, you sure did. So, how is it you managed to look so cheerful and alive and together?
Well, the book, I realized that when I started thinking about writing the book, that very few people write about their background, their culture, and what their formative years, especially their initial caregivers, taught them about both illness and disease. Illness and disease are two separate things. You can have an illness such as cancer, but the way your culture or your family, your intimate circle treats that illness, that diagnosis, has a lot to do with how you're going to attack it or whether you're just going to sit and accept it. And one of the things I found fascinating was the different cultural interpretations of different illnesses. There are certain illnesses that we don't have that other cultures do, and there are certain illnesses that we have that other cultures have never heard of. And I found this absolutely fascinating. For example, the island of Fiji never had anything known as an eating disorder. They had no idea what anorexia was until MTV started broadcasting on Fiji. And then suddenly the doctors began seeing eating disorders because the culture of MTV had, with skinny little models and skinny little girls and making sure that they only ate a grape for a day, transmitted itself to the Fijian culture, which never had any concept of body shaming before, and therefore they developed the illness of anorexia. So that started me thinking about my own attitude towards the illness. My mother, as I said, was probably one of the most brilliant people I've ever met, other than Ken Wilber. But unfortunately, she was plagued by a host of mental illnesses. As a matter of fact, the only diagnosis I think she did not have was bipolar. Other than that, she pretty well ran the gamut. And so as I was growing up, she taught me that she and her family were cursed with bad luck.
Wow.
And she called it the Curse of the Greenbergs, which was her maiden name. And she was also an international award-winning poet and writer, and wrote about the tragedies of her ancestors, especially the feminine line. And then she would get to her line and her tragedies of her life, and then she would look at me and say, and your chapter is yet to be written. Now, oh yes.
Yes.
What kind of message does that send to me? So when I was diagnosed with breast cancer first, instead of saying the usual, why me? My response was, well, of course it's me. Who else would it be? Supposedly 1 out of 8 women will develop breast cancer. Well, I had 8 very close friends and none of them got breast cancer but me. So I had to examine the cultural and psychological impact of the diagnosis and how I was going to deal with it. So that led me into depth psychology and to very, very seriously analyze my family of origin, what I had been taught about disease. And that meant I had to separate from my mother, even though she was gone by the time I was diagnosed, but the tapes, the messages that she had imprinted upon me from such an early age. And luckily, I had a brilliant therapist who was also a spiritual guide for me. And we were able to see how these messages hooked me constantly, and I would fall back on it. And it took years for me to unhook from this, I am cursed, only bad things happen to me. And I'll tell you what happened with the lung cancer diagnosis. First of all, I've never smoked a cigarette. Wow. The reason being that my mother's father died a horrible death of lung cancer. He knew that it was from his smoking. And he told my mother, don't you dare ever smoke a cigarette, which she never did. And she passed this on to me. So I was never in a smoking environment. I taught, I was in court. My husband didn't smoke. We didn't allow smoking in the house. So I certainly, the last thing on my mind was that I would ever develop lung cancer. The other thing was how odd it was that I was diagnosed with breast cancer, because the breast surgeon, when the mammogram came back questionable, she felt for lumps in my left breast, which is always what you're taught to do, self-examination. There was no lump anywhere. And so she said to me, the odds are, and I wrote a short story about this, which was published, the odds are 80% you do not have lung cancer, breast cancer. I can't feel a thing. So I thought that was pretty good. But she said, just to be certain, we'll do a needle biopsy. And I went off to a meditation retreat for a week and came back feeling just wonderful. And I had an appointment with her the next day, and I walked into her office and she looked very grim. And I said, why aren't you smiling? And she said, I never smile when I have bad news. And I said, okay, what is it? And she said, yes, you have invasive breast cancer. We have to take care of it right away. But don't worry, 80% of all women with breast cancer have your kind of breast cancer. I don't know why this was supposed to make me feel better.
Positive news. Yeah. Exactly.
And at first, for I guess a couple of months, I thought, well, 80% of the women that have my breast cancer. What I didn't ask her was how many survive.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was decided that at that point, well, several things happened, which have since changed because I protested. I was told to go home and come back and see her in 2 days, and we would discuss options. First thing that she did, and I'm a lawyer, I'm kind of trained to deal with different vocabularies and try to process them quickly. Medical terms I knew nothing about, and she kept rattling off medical terminology, biological terminology, couldn't figure out what she was saying. one of the things that I did when I wrote the book was that on the website of the book, integralhealingbook.com, I wrote a guide for those who have been newly diagnosed.
Oh, great idea.
And one of the things I strongly urge is that you bring along a friend to transcribe, to be the scribe, to write, because you're too bowled over. You are not thinking straight. And the terminology that she was throwing at me, I couldn't comprehend, I couldn't process. If you bring a friend along who can write these terms down and then give them to you later, that would be a much better idea. The second thing that they did wrong, and I criticized them on it, they sent me home. I was alone in a car. First, I couldn't find the car in the parking lot. I get into the car, it's rush hour, and I almost had several accidents. This should not have happened. Mm-hmm. And I urge any woman who has this situation to complain to the facility. I should have been taken into a room with a nurse practitioner or a social worker or someone who could have waited until I was cognizant and focused enough to drive a car at rush hour.
Yeah.
Anyway, I then sort of lost faith in my regional hospital and switched to Sloan Kettering. I live in northern New Jersey. I'm an hour and a half away from Sloan Kettering. Sloan Kettering and MD Anderson in Houston are the two top cancer hospitals in our country, and I decided that I'd be better off with Sloan. When I went to Sloan, even the top breast surgeon said, "I can't believe you have breast cancer. I can't feel anything, yet you have a large mass." And I'll tell you how we found out what this was all about. So much of what we read and women learn about, you must have breast self-examinations and then surely you will find the lump, or don't listen to mammograms. This is not true in every case. Had I not had a mammogram, they never would have detected the breast cancer. It was the only sign they had. I could have self-examined for years and I never would have found anything because he didn't either.
You bring up so many issues here. I'm listening to the influence of your psyche and your history and your culture, the social experience of going in and trying to work with this, and the way that you're treated, and the cultural understandings of how to provide information and all that. I mean, it's just an amazing, you step right into the soup of every kind of aspect of illness management showed up in just the first couple of days here, it sounds like to me.
Yeah, it was rather overwhelming. The next thing that they do, thank goodness, when you've been diagnosed with breast cancer, they do a PET scan of your entire body because they want to make sure that it has not metastasized somewhere else, or perhaps it was a secondary tumor. So they did a PET scan, and I thought, well, I have breast cancer. How worse could it be? And it was the day before Thanksgiving. I was chopping vegetables. I remember this very clearly, on a chopping board. And my oncologist called me and said, "Lynn, we got the PET scan. Now, I don't want you to worry."
Oh, yeah, right there.
Okay. I stopped chopping. She said, "We discovered a dot on your left lung. But I know you had severe childhood asthma, so I am chalking this up to scar tissue. However, because you have breast cancer, we're going to have to do a biopsy of that spot on your lung. We'll see you right after Thanksgiving." Yeah. I went to...
Nice holiday. Yeah.
It was. I don't even remember the holiday. I was... First, I played the game. Oh, it can't be lung cancer. I'm going through all the reasons that I was safe, and then all the reasons why I had no reason to think I was safe. So you go back and forth between the plus and the minuses. And I went to Sloan right after Thanksgiving, and the radiologist was standing, and he was looking very puzzled at the scan of what he had seen on the PET scan, he said, I have shown this scan to every member of the Sloan Kettering cancer team. Nobody's ever seen anything like it.
Wow.
You don't want to hear this. So,
No.
being novel like that, I'd rather have, 80% of the people, we know what this is.
Now you know why that was a good comment.
Right. So when Rick and I looked at it, it looked just like a jellyfish. And the reason that it was puzzling was that it was translucent.
Oh.
It was a translucent mass with tentacles, which was obviously, I could see, blood supply. So I didn't think it was scar tissue.
Mm.
And I said to him, what do you think it is? Take a guess. He said, well, I'm just the radiologist. I don't know. I said, look, you're about to put me to sleep to do this biopsy to find out what it is. Just what's your guess? He said, well, if I had to guess, it would be small cell lung cancer. Unfortunately, my best friend's sister-in-law had just died of small cell lung cancer 2 weeks before. So he put me to sleep, and I woke up and had a complete meltdown at home. My husband very wisely prohibited me from going on the internet.
Oh.
Because I found out small cell lung cancer has basically you live 18 months.
Oh.
And what my friend's sister-in-law had survived 18 months. Anyway, I was scheduled 3 days later for chemotherapy. So I went to what they call the infusion suite. You're not prepared for this unless somebody tells you, but all the nurses in the infusion or chemo suite are wearing hazmat suits.
Oh dear.
See, nobody tells you these things.
Yeah.
Because when you get chemotherapy, you are basically getting a severe poison.
Mm.
And should any drop on their skin, they risk being poisoned. So imagine something out of a science fiction story.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, I'm all hooked up with the IV. The door opens up to the infusion suite, and down comes my oncologist running to the infusion suite with a piece of paper in her hand, and she yells, "Stop, no chemotherapy, no chemotherapy, she has lung cancer."
Oh, God.
Now, this was good news and bad news. The good news was no chemo that day. Bad news was I now had lung cancer. And again, my mother's prophecy hit really, really bad.
Mm.
I called up a friend who was an oncologist, and he said, well, you won the cancer trifecta. Imagine that, lung and breast. Bad luck, bad luck.
Bad luck.
However, this is like this good news, bad news. It turns out that the lung cancer, because it was translucent, would never have been detected on an X-ray. Ever.
So that's two very strange kinds of illnesses that you got. Yeah.
Had I not had breast cancer, they never would have done a PET scan. But the lung cancer was growing and growing in an asymptomatic area. So the lung cancer specialist said to me, you are so lucky that you had breast cancer, because the only thing that could have detected your lung cancer was a PET scan.
Mm.
Had you not had this PET scan from your breast cancer, this would have continued to grow. And in 3 years, you would have started to have a bloody cough. You would have gone to the doctor, and he would have said, I'm sorry, you're terminal.
Wow.
So
it reminds me of the Chinese story of the fellow who's something happens to his son, and the villagers say that, he says maybe so, maybe not, and then something else happens, and they say, oh, how unlucky, and he says maybe so, maybe not. Yeah.
And so people, when I told them the story, their brows would furrow and they go, wait a minute, you're lucky you have breast cancer? We don't quite get this story.
Yeah, no.
But it saved my life. I would have been dead in 3 years from the lung cancer. It was, and people always ask, was it a secondary cancer? No, it was not. It was a primary cancer. It was not related in any way to the lung cancer, to the breast cancer. Now, why did this happen? That led me on a detective search. Why did I wind up with 2 cancers popping up suddenly? And I had to be careful when writing the book because I'm not a physician. And I couldn't state equivocally that I found this connection because I'm not a doctor. But I'd read enough medical journals to learn that in women, breast cancer is associated with stress at work.
Interesting.
And I tell the story of severe stress that I had at work that led to me having a stroke in my eye. And so it was no surprise that 2 years after I left my job as a teacher that I developed these 2 cancers. There is a correlation.
Yeah.
So that was...
Well, I think we can say probably that stress is going to affect everything about the body, that it causes all kinds of problems. And whatever it is you have a tendency toward, it's probably going to exacerbate it.
Exactly.
And reading your book, I could see the level of stress that you had gone through in your family. And that's another issue that I want to mention for people with illness, is that they're not only dealing with their illness, they're dealing with all of the ordinary problems that people have, and sometimes very extraordinary problems like yours in a family. There's a work stress, there's family stress, that doesn't go away. That continues to stay with you.
And it's something that's not really dealt with. And one of the things that Ken Wilber and integral theory has embedded in my brain is that we dare not just look at one aspect of our lives and say, if we take care of X, we've taken care of A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. It's a totality. It is indeed a totality. And I had to learn how to manage my family stress and to deal with the insults to my body and my mind that I had over the years of family stress, which were extraordinary.
Yes. Anybody reading your book will probably just be horrified at the level of stress. Really, really incredible. So the fact that you didn't, you hadn't gotten ill, it would have been surprising, really.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I was told right before I retired from my teaching job, and I had to sue the school in order to retire, it was people were jealous that I was a lawyer, and I had an Ivy League degree. There was anyway. It was a situation where in 2007, I began getting sick and not being able to recover, bronchitis after bronchitis after bronchitis. And my doctor, who I quote in the book, and every time I see him, he smiles, thank you for quoting me in your book. But he said to me in 2007, Lynn, your immune system has quit. You'd better get this lawsuit settled and retire, or you're not going to live 6 months more.
Good advice.
So 2 years later, I developed 2 cancers. So it really, in a sense, did not come as a surprise. There's a book that I revere called The Body Keeps Score.
Oh, okay.
And I would recommend that to anyone who has a serious illness, to look, not that you blame it on your father or your mother, or yourself, but that you understand that these hits that we take psychologically affect us on a cellular level.
And that brings up the idea, I'm offering this course on dealing with chronic illness. And one of the things we use, you've referred to Ken Wilber's integral theory, is the quadrants. The 4 quadrants, 4 windows that you can look at your illness through. And one of those is that interior psychological self. That is a key aspect in healing. Another, of course, is the individual physical self. You have to look at those. And then things you've also brought up is the culture and the messages and the relationships. All of those are also significant. And then the systems that you got yourself involved in. You go into the hospital and they have certain ways of handling things, which may not be to your benefit necessarily. So if you're not looking at all of these windows as you did, as you've already brought up in just this initial comments about your illness, that if we're not looking at all of those, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. If we leave out any one of those 4 quadrants, it's very difficult.
First thing I did when I got home after the diagnosis, I drew the 4 quadrants on a big sheet of paper, and I dedicated myself to paying attention to all 4 of them at once, and began devising a plan to attend to each of the quadrants. And so that led me to really in-depth therapy as well. Oh, and I have some odd stories that I relate. How some people will eschew medical care of the highest quality for alternative therapies. I happened to meet my girlfriend at a restaurant, and she was meeting with a friend of hers who was a massage therapist. And she had told him about my dual diagnosis. And he said to me, "You're not thinking of surgery or chemotherapy, are you? For God's sake, I hope you aren't." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, because I'm a massage therapist. If you come to my office, I'll massage away your breast and your lung cancer."
Yeah.
No. No.
Yes, and that happens so often in our society. People get into one camp or another, either into conventional medicine or into alternative medicine, and the other is regarded with total horror.
Absolutely.
And the fact that both might have something to contribute just is not taken into account. And I think the idea of integral, again, is both and, not either or.
Absolutely, and that is exactly how I dealt with my illness. I will tell you, it was very interesting. I spoke to the nutritionist at Sloan, and she said that they don't really believe in organic foods. Well, that's nice for them, but I do. So, it wasn't that I said, well, if the doctor doesn't believe in it, I'm not going to do it. I used my knowledge and my own sense of myself and my body. I also learned from, and these are double-blind studies, that things such as prayer, meditation, and affirmations do have positive outcomes. They've done studies on this. So we're not talking woo-woo crystals. We're talking about complementary methods that do help. The other thing that I remember, a nurse was absolutely horrified when they did the needle biopsy on me, and I didn't flinch. And the nurse said to me, "How did you not scream when I did this?" And I said, "I was meditating." So, there's so many ways that this does help us as we go through both and. The one thing that I also learned that I must caution people, if you go through chemotherapy, as I decided to do based on my research for my cancer, there are certain holistic medications or vitamins, whatever, that counteract the chemotherapy. And I forgot what they are offhand, but you do have to watch out for that. So the both and doesn't mean that you do everything from both. If you do decide to go through chemotherapy, then watch out for the interaction with certain other modalities. So that's another piece of advice that I would give to people.
Yeah, and in some cases it's the other way around, that in fact, I know if you're taking antibiotics, it's not often suggested that you take a probiotic at the same time.
Yeah.
Because all of the bacteria get cleared out of your system, including the good. So
Absolutely.
Doctors don't usually recommend this, but it's amazing what a difference it makes if you have to take an antibiotic. If you're adding the alternative suggestion of the probiotic makes a huge difference.
Right, right.
Yeah. So yes, you have to, and finding somebody who can understand both of these and advise you. You know,
Well,
you were left on your own to figure this out.
yes. And that's why I wrote the book. I am a volunteer for 6 years now with Cancer Hope Network. It's headquartered in New Jersey, but it functions across the country, and I'm very active with them. I had 2 calls yesterday. These they use an algorithm. They put in my personal information, and then when someone calls hysterical and says, I've been newly diagnosed, I think I'm the only, one woman said, I think I'm the only person in the world who was diagnosed with both breast and lung. And they went, nope, we have somebody else. And so I advise them. And you get some very interesting, I learned so much about being a patient. That one woman said to me, how do I hide the fact that I'm going to lose my hair from the ladies at the yacht club?
Oh.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I tried reconstructive breast, and I got a severe cellulitis infection. No one told me that 20% of all women who do breast reconstruction get a serious infection. I was hospitalized at Sloan for 8 days with the cellulitis infection, and they finally had to do emergency surgery. Because when they implant anything foreign into your body, it can have a tiny bit of bacteria in it.
Oh, I see.
Tissue expanders that they put in by your chest wall, it's a foreign body. So, and then the plastic surgeon said, oh, now that you're cured, let's try it again. And I said, let's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have a lot of calls with women who say, my friends have had trouble with breast reconstruction. You have a prosthesis. How does that go? It goes very well if you have the right fitting. I went to one of the cancer hospitals nearby where they have experts who advised me on the appropriate look and feel of the prosthesis. And when you do lose your hair, nobody tells you that it hurts. It actually hurts when you lose your hair. The roots die, and it hurts, and nobody warns you about this. But my husband, God rest his soul, who saw me through this and was my cheerleader. I lost him 1.5 years ago, but he and I decided that I would buy a bunch of wigs, not expensive, of different styles, and we gave them names. And he would say, why don't you wear Daisy today? And I said, wear Daisy. And the other funny story was I got sick and wigs itch. They're uncomfortable when it's hot. And I remember we went to Barnes & Noble looking for a book, and we separated. And I said to him, I can't stand the itching of the wig. I threw it in the back seat and started walking around the store. It was winter and we all had coats on. And he saw me and ran over to me from the back and gave me a big hug, only to find out he was hugging a tall, bald man.
Well, I love it that you bring humor in, because that's, humor is another very, very healing thing for all of us. And that's not often talked about either. One thing I wanted to get back to that comes out of what you were talking about is the need to self-manage. That there is nobody, we all think we're gonna, whatever's gonna happen to us in our life, we're gonna go to somebody and they're going to take care of it all somehow. And it takes a long time. I mean, even as a caregiver, when my son got ill, I kept thinking I would find somebody who would manage this. And it took many, many years to come to the conclusion that no, there is nobody else out there. You are your own manager. You can use all these people as consultants, whether they're alternative or they're conventional or whatever, and whatever suggestions, but somehow you have to be the one in the end to weigh that decision as to what you're going to do. And so you're in charge.
Lynne, you are so right on. I have sort of an uncomfortable situation. My oncologist is not receptive to the alternative methods. And I'll tell you another story. After I was through with chemotherapy, uh, they discovered they discovered a lymph node on my clavicle right here, and they said they had been watching it for 6 months and it was growing, and they were afraid that it was a metastatic breast cancer.
Yeah.
And it was right here, and they were going to do a needle biopsy at Sloan. And I put myself into, I had these wonderful, wonderful guides on cellular meditation. And I had practiced it for months and months. I said to Rick, I need a week to be left alone. I am going to do cellular meditation on whatever this mass is. And I spent a week in deep meditation on a cellular level.
Right.
And they draped me for the surgery. Rick kissed me goodbye. And they wheeled me in. And the surgeon had an ultrasound wand where she was going to discover exactly where this huge lump was. And I could feel her kind of pausing and going around with the wand. And then she goes up the side of my neck. And I'm thinking, what is she doing? It was right here. And then I heard her whisper, call in the surgeon from the next room. I don't understand this. She calls in the surgeon from the other operating theater. He comes in. He looks at the ultrasound. He looks at the original x-ray and he goes, oh, it's right here. And I feel him with the wand. He goes up the side of my neck. And what? And he looked at me and he said, Lynn, it's your lucky day. The mass is gone.
Wow.
So my oncologist heard of it, ran down the hall and hugged me and cried
Oh.
that it was nothing. And I said, do you want me to tell you what I did? And she said, no.
No. Never the twain shall meet, right?
That's correct. My therapist, spiritual guide, doesn't want to hear about the medications that I take.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and how difficult that is. What a
Yeah.
position that puts you in. I really, that is something I think that's going to have to change in our culture. I mean, because it's not only the physicians or the alternative practitioners who hold this position, but it's many, many people. They fall into one camp or another, and they will not hear from somebody in the other camp. And that has to change. We have to be so much more open. I mean, if we really want to heal, as you talk about, integral healing involves all of these things.
All of it. And yes, Lynn, sometimes we just have to make a pact with ourselves that we have one foot in one world paradigm and another foot in another paradigm. We understand that we are well balanced.
Right.
But the others don't see it that way.
And that comes back to having confidence in yourself. Even though you're there, you don't understand all the medical terms. People are telling you one thing. My husband had cancer last year, and we ended up going, if you go to the radiologist, they tell you that's the only way to go. If you go to the surgeon, they tell you that's the only way you go. If you go on the internet and you start reading the alternative medicine people, that's the only way to go. And people are cast adrift. I think your comment about somebody needs to be taken into a room and given all this information, because you stayed off the internet. I don't know how you did. Most people will immediately start
That
researching.
wasn't for long, but
That wasn't for long.
it made me crazy. No, Lynn, you're right. I started reading these message boards for other women who had cancer. You're right. My husband would not allow me to go on these message boards and
Yeah.
to research. You're right.
Yeah, because you can drive yourself insane. I mean, you get absolutely convinced that this particular, whether it's eating asparagus or whatever, is going to cure you. And then you read somebody else and you think, well, no, this person's right. So you can, not only are you handed this diagnosis, but you're handed this massive research project, which, is another thing that I think if we can bring these two worlds together and have some really good research done on the effects of both so that people can get a really good sense of where they're going. Because right now you're just left, the quacks and the serious practitioners are left in the same ballpark. You don't know who not only do you research that, then you have to research who actually had this idea, and are they worth following? And, it becomes, you end up getting a PhD in whatever illness you have. And that does not, to me, seem right. I think there should be sources for us that can help. Now, you talk about integral healing. Now, there is something called integrative medicine. Can you distinguish those two a little bit for us, maybe?
Certainly can. Because I've spoken with the gentleman and he gave me such great assistance in Dr. Kreisberg. Integral has a negative nuance among a lot of people. A lot of it has come through people on the internet who have found out that certain spiritual teachers who have called themselves integral have been bad boys. Mm-hmm. Others have milked people for bogus conferences and healing modalities or spiritual modalities. So this particular doctor said, I am now switching to the word integrative because it tends to eliminate some of the baggage that unfortunately the term integral has taken on among some people.
And I think that's right. We need a new vocabulary for these things as well.
Now, I called up, excuse me, I called up an integrative, my grandson needed a neuropsychiatric exam because, again, I'm going into the field of special education law now because I want to apply integral theory to special ed. He's not autistic, thank God he's not. He has something called sensory processing disorder, which came about through a very, very difficult cesarean birth that he went through. It's a trauma from his birth. So I was looking for an integral or integrative pediatric neurologist, and I called the gentleman up and I said, you say you're integrative. Could you explain that to me? And he said, well, we talk to the parents.
Oh,
okay. So you have to even be careful with that term.
Yeah, my experience with integrated medicine has been that it is medicine with a few extra things thrown in. Like somebody will have an office and they might have a psychotherapist that they can refer people to. But it's not integral in the sense of fully looking at all of the factors that can go into healing. So the name, I think people have to be careful. Look really at what somebody is doing, not just what label they put on themselves. Integrative medicine is all the rage now, but many people define it very differently.
I think John Oliver had a wonderful expose of rehabs where they charge, whatever it is, $60,000, $70,000 for equine therapy.
Yes. Which might be great for some person, but not for everybody. Yeah.
Not much for me.
And then you end up with, if you go to a certain person who's integrative, you end up with their particular modalities, which might be equine therapy, or it might be meditation, or it might be anything. And you go to somebody else and they have another little complement of, might be massage, it might be this. So again, that brings you back to managing yourself. Is this sufficient for me? Do I need to step outside of what this particular person is offering me and look beyond it? And then how do I reconcile these, or avoid problems like one thing, as you said, interfering with the chemo or something like that. And trying to weigh all that, very, very difficult.
Well, you've said that brilliantly. If you could copy that down and put it on your website, you would be doing a public service.
Thank you. Well, that's another thing. I think all of us who live in this world can do a public service. I like your guide, your Bring a Friend. I just wrote a guide for people with CFS about bringing your caregiver with you. Yeah. And doctors often look upon this as overprotection, or they're trying to body into the problem or something like that. But that's not the case. When somebody's in there and they're brain fogged and they're not feeling well, or there are a lot of terms, you can't take it all down. You need somebody else in there to actually get the information. There was some study done that people forget something like 75% of what the doctor has said by the time they get home. So, and then they're told they're not following directions. But,
not compliant.
Yeah, so either they need to have everything in writing or they need to bring somebody. I think that's just really, really good advice. Anybody dealing with a complex illness of some sort needs a scribe, or even tape what was said for yourself if you haven't got somebody to bring them in.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I think a number of those kinds of practices, and I think we can help each other in that regard by putting out that kind of information and offering it to people, so that they're not all alone on this.
Yeah.
You know, you in your book, you say something about Lou Richmond's work about the cycles that people go through when they're ill, and I thought that was really, really interesting. And I wonder if you could take a few minutes and talk about that.
It was, you know, I love to read, obviously, and I tend to, in trying to be as creative as possible, and certainly I needed to stretch out and be as creative as possible. I'll read everything, even if it doesn't appear to apply, because something will hit and I'll go, oh my goodness, that's the perfect metaphor. Never thought about it before. And Lewis Richmond came up with this analysis of aging. And when it first hits you that you're aging, hello, and he calls it, the first thing that happens is lightning strike. And I thought, well, if that doesn't apply to a cancer or severe illness diagnosis, nothing else does. And I began researching what lightning does to the human body, and what a horrible effect it has on the body mind. And again, all the beliefs that you have that you may not think that you have suddenly come up, whether it was, again, what I was taught by my mother or what your culture teaches you. One of the problems that we're having in New Jersey, and I also worked at Hackensack Hospital in the chemo ward, answering people's questions. When it came to the Korean women, I was not allowed to speak to them. I had to speak to their husbands.
Oh my, yes.
So you have to be very careful of these cultural taboos. And even though she may have wanted very much to speak to me directly, she really wasn't allowed. So anyway, so these lightning strikes that bring up all of this to the surface.
Yeah, exactly.
And it lasts for a long time. You become Lynne with cancer. And you're not like anybody else. Then I was sitting in the office and I noticed a young woman coming out with a bald head. And I thought, well, you know, I'm in my 60s. I'm past child bearing. Here's this young woman who obviously is going through chemotherapy. Her lightning strike is entirely different from my lightning strike. Did she have to consider whether she wanted more children? Did she have children? There's a matter of retrieving eggs. And then I remembered a young child, 3 years old, with brain cancer who passed away in my daughter's kindergarten, preschool class. And what that's like for parents to have to explain a tragic illness to a young. These are all different lightning strikes.
Yes, you're right. Really crises, but everybody has this different crisis depending on the life stage they're in, or You're
So
right.
Eventually you come to terms. And it's the coming to terms that is the discovery that I used with the 4 quadrants. Okay, I'm going to dedicate myself to what I've been teaching all these years about integral theory, integral education, integral law, integral spirituality. I'm going to use that. So that was my coming to terms. This is what I'm going to do. And settling on how I would fill in the 4 quadrants with different modalities. And if something didn't work, I'd go on to something else. I mean, it's not written in stone. As you said, Lynne, quite correctly, equine therapy might work for you. It's not going to work for me.
Mhm.
It's just not. Next is adaptation. How are you going to adapt this new stage of you're now a new person. After chemotherapy, you're a new person, a different person. And I read something that I didn't believe and then found out it was true. I was asked, do I want to join a support group with other women who have had breast cancer? No, I don't need it. I've written a book. I don't need it.
Nobody can teach me anything. Yeah.
I'm fine, thank you. And in my studies, I found out, again, it was a study, women tend to go to support groups 2 years after their diagnosis.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
And son of a gun, 2 years after, I joined a support group because I really needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And the best the person who did the study never tried to dig deeper, but my hunch is, while you're going through the coming to terms, okay, I'll have this, I'll do that, I'm not going to do that, I'll do that, and you begin in the adaptation phase, you need to hear and process what you have just been through, because you are a different person than you had been. And how are you coping with that? Because at the razor's edge, in the crisis of the moment, you don't really have a chance to sit back and say, well, how am I doing?
Yes, right. Reflection isn't part of that initial stage of dealing with it. No.
And I felt the support group, and there was only one woman who was who had recently ended her chemotherapy. You weren't allowed in the group if you were still going through chemo or radiation, but all of us had hit that 2-year mark, and that's when we really needed it. So that's the adaptation. I struggled with my my prosthetic breast until I got the proper one, and now I'm happy with it and nobody can tell. I'm balanced, so nobody could tell under my clothes. I found there are beautiful bathing suits for people with prosthetic breasts. They're lovely, and so I felt happy with that. I could go swimming just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And then the last part I found really interesting, and that was appreciation.
Oh, yes.
And it wasn't, oh, I'm so lucky I had cancer. I don't believe that. I'm not lucky. But what it forced me to do finally, and I'm about to turn 73 next month, I finally resolved issues with my mother, whom I loved dearly, but who left bad tapes in my head that I had to resolve, yet still love her. The hurts that were done to me by various people, and appreciate that of all the bad, I call them pearls on a necklace. They're ugly pearls on my necklace, the bad things that happened to me, and I was only looking at the bad pearls on my necklace. And I had to force myself to look at the beautiful pearls on my necklace and come to appreciate that in balance, it was fine. It was fine. And
that's a level of maturity that I think sometimes only going through something like illness can bring you. My experience with people who've been dealing with profoundly difficult life situations such as illness, they're often deeper people. They're often more profound. They have been forced to reflect on these questions and forced to deal with some of these issues. So in a sense, there is, as you said, they're the beautiful pearls. They're the gifts that these kinds of illness give us, the opportunity to grow more deeply.
Yeah.
And something else that I've been thinking about as you talk is one of my concerns is to reframe the way we see illness and ill people in this society. We think of them as invalids. We put them aside until they can join the rest of humanity, as it were, instead of recognizing that that is humanity, that that is a perfectly valid lifestyle from which we can learn and grow. It's not a life path that's somehow gone askew. It is a life path. It is something that we can, take as much pride in as any kind of career or anything like that. It is its own kind of career, its own exploration of life. So, and I think you've demonstrated that in your the way you've handled this illness and how you've grown from it. Just the few things you've said about that.
I thank you. I part of it was coming to terms with aging. I taught high school for 25 years, and of course, dealing with 17 and 18-year-old snarky kids. Yeah. As I got older, they'd make fun of me. No, you're so old. And my comment to them was, some of you will not live as long as I have lived.
Mm.
So, and that always set them back. That aging, as Louis Richmond said, is something that we also should not push away. And I'm finding something interesting demographically because of the economy, which I'll mention. Just this week, my house is in chaos. I hope you can't see it. When my husband passed away a year and a half ago, the choice was to sell this house and live in a condo or whatever. But I have a daughter, a son-in-law, and a little grandson who live nearby. And I decided, no, I'd add space for them to come live with me. So that little Adam, who's 6, will see me age. And I will not that I'm casting aspersions at people who go to retirement communities, but it's also important for children, the old-fashioned way for multiple generations, to live together so that they understand old people should not be thrust away. If they want to go, fine. And I found out in town, all the contractors are now working on either the children are moving in with the parents or the parents are moving in with the children.
Oh my.
So I think that's of interest. They will see illness. They will see aging. And I think that's only to the better of society. And you're also quite right about illness. We do treat them as others. And I don't want to get into politics, but the comment that John McCain was not a hero because he got captured was one of the most horrendous anti-human things that I have ever heard. That a brave man, I get goosebumps when I think about it, that anyone could ascribe weakness to John McCain. You may not like his politics, but anyone would cast aspersions on this man is another way of saying, unless you have perfect genes and have never been sick, you don't deserve to be in society.
Yeah, I think you bring that. We do have this obsession with perfection.
Yep.
An obsession with the Pepsi generation, as it
Yep.
used to be. Everybody is having this riotously good time, which leaves people who are not, for financial reasons, for illness reasons, for aging reasons, for, capture. All of those things happen to us. And until we bring them into the mainstream of society and we realize this is us, this is all of us, we all have these things. And I think your book does a wonderful job of doing that. It brings a real human person with many, many human problems into the forefront. And here you are, you've managed this, you've learned from this, and you're lively and sitting with me today. So I think it's a great testament. I think we're running out of time, and I want to suggest to people that they get this book, and we'll put this under the recordings where you can find the book, Integral Healing by Lynne Feldman. Also, if you're interested in taking the course on the koan of illness, I've got a series of courses. One starts this Saturday, and others will continue, and they're all standalone. So
let me just say, Lynn, I would recommend the courses. Even if you are not ill, someone you know and love or you will become ill. it's going to happen.
That's
And
true.
The Koan of Illness, I think, is a brilliant title.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, it came from a friend of mine, and I'll describe that another time. But anyway, thank you so much, Lynn. I think people will get a great deal out of listening to you, and I hope maybe we can do this again sometime.
Okay.
Okay.
Delightful. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.